Desperate cowboy rescues, twin sisters mocked for singing. Their song stunned the whole saloon. Garrett Hayes pressed his back to the warped brick behind the rusty spur saloon, the June sun bleeding its last light across Silver Rock's one dusty street. He could taste sweat and gun oil on his tongue, but all he held was a frayed coin pouch. He poured its meager contents into his palm. Copper clinks echoed in the alley like mockery. 13 cents. Not even enough for a cup of bitter brew, let alone the $120 that Red Jack Turner swore he would collect before nightfall. Yesterday, Garrett had sold his horse to buy an extra sunrise. This morning, he'd pawned his colt and the tarnished badge he once carried with pride. All he had left was an empty holster and a knotted ache in his gut that felt a lot like fear. From inside the spur floated piano twangs, hollered bets, the wet thud of boots on spittoons. Garrett might have slipped deeper into the maze of alleys, kept running, as he'd done for weeks, if not for the sound that cracked through the din like dry timber. Mean laughter. He risked a glance around the doorway. The saloon's batwing doors framed a scene of jeering men and curling smoke. At the threshold stood two barefoot girls, mirror images in sun-bleached patchwork dresses, 12 at most. Ella clutched a dented tin cup. Grace gripped a torn scrap of paper, fingers white at the knuckles. They looked like lambs wandered into a slaughter pen. Ella lifted her chin and began to sing, a silver thread of melody trembling but pure. For half a breath, the room stilled. Then a beer tin whistled through pipe smoke and slapped Grace across the cheek, spilling foam onto the floorboards. The girls flinched. The crowd howled. Buck Miller, a slab-shouldered farmhand with a gold tooth, slapped the bar and roared, "Sing louder, ragdolls, or dance." Another man dangled a nickel on its edge, then flicked it away so it rang off Grace's toes. Something inside Garrett twisted hard. Desperation, he understood, but cruelty to children? No. His pulse drummed. His empty holster felt heavier than any six-shooter. He watched Ella wipe her sister's tears and whisper courage. They would try again, because hunger leaves no room for pride. A sudden hush fell outside. Spurs, 4 sets, crisp against the wooden planks. Garrett's breath hitched. Red Jack's posse. He imagined the outlaw's crimson duster, cold eyes, the promise of interest in lead. 2 minutes, maybe less, before those boots paused at the saloon door. Run deeper into shadows, or step into that smoke-choked room where two fragile voices already fought a crowd twice their size? Garrett slid the coins back into his pouch. 13 useless cents, and straightened. The choice, he realized, was no longer about debts. It was about the kind of man he refused to stop being. He tipped his hat against the dying light, pushed off the wall, and strode toward the rusty spur's swinging doors, just as the spurs drew nearer, jangling like a countdown to judgment. Garrett shouldered through the batwing doors, and every candlelit poker table froze like a photograph. Smoke coiled around his boots while the piano's last chord dangled unresolved in the haze. 50 men, ranch hands, miners, ramblers, tracked the stranger with hollow holsters and two bright eyes. Garrett's gaze, however, locked on the twins near the bar. Ella standing as straight as a fence post, Grace biting her lip to hide the sting of that thrown tin. "Evening, gents," Garrett muttered, staking a spot beside the upright piano. The bartender nodded, sensing the undertow in the room. Something heavier than cheap whiskey had just walked in. Buck Miller curled a grin, gold tooth catching lamplight. "Well now, hero thinks he can rescue ragdolls with air in his pockets." A ripple of laughter spread, nervous this time, not cruel. Ella stepped forward before Garrett could speak. Her voice, small but unwavering, rose like a lark at dawn. The first notes floated across the saloon, warm and clear, wrapping around tobacco smoke and stale sweat with impossible grace. Grace joined on the third measure, harmony weaving through the melody as naturally as twin vines on a fence. Conversation died mid-sentence. A card player's hand hovered above an ace. A bottle halted inches from cracked lips. Even Buck's leer faltered. Garrett felt the song seep into him, soft, sure, carrying a promise he'd forgotten the world could keep. Around him chairs creaked as men leaned forward, their rough faces unmasked by wonder. For 90 heartbeats, the rusty spur held something like prayer. Then spurs rasped against the threshold, slicing the spell in two. Red Jack Turner filled the doorway, scarlet duster swirling behind him like storm clouds. 3 gunmen fanned out, eyes hard, hands resting easy on polished Colts. Red Jack's gaze scanned the silent crowd, puzzled by the hush, until it settled on Garrett and narrowed to the cold slit of a rifle barrel. "Well, I'll be," he drawled, voice smooth as snake oil. Garrett Hayes, hiding in a choir loft. Ella's song caught in her throat. Grace's final note quivered away, leaving a vacuum the room dared not fill. Red Jack tipped his black hat and stepped inside, boots thudding like coffin lids. He thumbed the hammer of his revolver with lazy menace. "Debt collection time, folks. Entertainment's over." No one laughed now. 50 men who'd mocked innocence minutes earlier found themselves protective of it, shy even of breathing too loud. Buck shifted, guilt tinting his cheeks. The bartender slid his hand beneath the bar, then thought better of it. Garrett's pulse thundered, but he forced his voice level. "Let the girls finish, Jack. They're just earning supper." Red Jack smirked, eyes never leaving Garrett. "Finish? Sure, but the encore's on my terms." He flicked a silver dollar onto the floorboards. It spun, rang, and settled between Garrett's boots, like a coin tossed for souls. Outside, dusk surrendered to night. Inside, tension cinched tight as a hangman's knot, waiting to snap with the next note or the next gunshot. Red Jack's silver dollar lay glinting between Garrett's boots like a promise of blood. The outlaw drew his Colt with a languid grace, barrel tilting toward Garrett's heart. "120, Hayes," he said, tapping metal to palm for punctuation. "Dead men pay in silence. Living men pay in cash." Garrett spread empty hands. "You see any cash?" A tense chuckle rippled, but it died when Jack cocked the hammer. Grace whimpered. Ella, cheeks streaked with soot and courage, stepped in front of her sister. "Sir," she said, voice steady as a church bell, "there's only $60 on that bar." She nodded at the pile Buck Miller had sheepishly started. Coins, crumpled bills, even a silver brooch tossed in by a miner's wife. "If our next song pulls a tear from your eye, will you take it and leave us all be?" Jack's grin sharpened. "Little Angel thinks she can buy a miracle with music." He spun the cylinder once. "Fine. Make me cry, I walk with 60. Fail, I take Hayes's life, and the debt doubles for the funeral." The crowd shifted like cattle sensing lightning. Buck swallowed hard. Dust motes drifted in lamplight, waiting for the first note or first shot. Garrett caught Ella's gaze, gave a tiny nod. "Do it." Ella clasped Grace's trembling hand. Together they inhaled, and a lullaby poured forth, soft as moonlight on water. Garrett knew no hymn by that tune, yet every line felt carved from his own forgotten tenderness. A mother's promise, a lantern in the dark, a name whispered against the cold. Faces thawed. Buck's fist unclenched. Whiskey sloshed unnoticed onto the floor. The piano player, who had been hiding behind the lid, picked out gentle chords to follow them, as though the melody had always waited inside the wood. Garrett watched Red Jack. At first, the outlaw's smirk held, then his jaw twitched. The hand holding the Colt eased, lowering inch by inch as the song climbed. When the twins reached the high refrain, a note so pure it seemed to braid heaven in dust, Jack blinked. A single tear welled, trembled on his scar, and fell. Gasps fluttered like sparrows. Ella finished on a breath that quivered, then vanished. Silence reigned, thick and holy. Jack holstered his weapon with a sigh that sounded suspiciously like surrender. He strode to the bar, scooped the $60, and slid it into his coat. "Debt paid," he muttered, avoiding Garrett's eyes. "Enjoy your mercy, Hayes." Relief crashed through the room. Chairs scraped, lungs remembered to breathe. But before gratitude could blossom, hoofbeats thundered outside. The bat-wing doors slammed wide, framing Marshal Wade Carter, badge catching lamplight like a star. 6 deputies fanned in behind. "Evening, Turner," the marshal called, voice calm as loaded steel. "Put your hands where I can see 'em." Cheyenne Bank wants its money back, and I've got a rope that says you'll oblige. Red Jack's hand drifted toward his Colt once more. Panic rippled across the saloon. Garrett shielded the twins with his body, heart plunging from hope to dread in a single pulse. Because Mercy's reprieve had lasted seconds, and the next storm was already breaking through the door. Red Jack's fingers twitched at his holster. Marshall Carter's Colt was already level, hammer drawn back with an ominous hiss. For one breathless instant, the entire rusty spur seemed balanced on a hair trigger. Lamplight glinting off broken glass, Ella and Grace pressing against Garrett's ribs beneath the upended piano. 50 patrons frozen between salvation and slaughter. The hair snapped. Jack ducked sideways, fanning 2 shots toward Carter. The marshal dove for a card table that exploded into splinters. Deputies answered, sharp cracks that punched mirrors into silver rain and sent bottle shards sleeting across the bar. Cowhands toppled chairs and crawled for cover, curses drowned by gunfire's thunder. Garrett flattened the twins behind the cracked piano, splinters biting his palms. He felt the girls shake, yet they did not scream. Instead, Grace squeezed his coat sleeve and whispered, barely audible over the chaos, "Mama said music beats fear." Garrett wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but another bullet whined past his ear, snapping a piano string with a metallic wail. Red Jack rolled to the bar, dragged a patron's rifle free, and barked orders. "Hold the lawmen! I want Hayes alive!" 2 of his gunmen vaulted tables, spurs flashing. Muzzle flares strobed the saloon in hellish reds and yellows, every boom rattling glass chimneys on the lamps. Then, of all people, Dusty Sam, the town drunk so pickled he could barely stand most nights, rose from behind an overturned stool. Bullets zipped overhead, but he lifted empty hands and strode into the killing zone as though strolling a Sunday aisle. "Jack," he hollered, voice cracking like old leather. "You remember Lucy? Your baby sister used to braid my horse's mane." The room stuttered. Even Deputy Myers paused mid-aim. Red Jack's rifle faltered by a fraction. Dusty Sam kept walking, eyes damp but steady. "She sang Sweet Colorado every dusk," he said. "Sounds a mite like what them girls got." Jack's jaw clenched. A vein pulsed at his temple. "You shut that memory up, old man," he growled. But the menace wavered. Dusty Sam stopped 5 paces away, unarmed heart beating louder than any revolver, and pointed at Ella and Grace. "Lucy'd be ashamed of this gun smoke." Silence wove a thin thread through the saloon. Enough space for Ella to draw breath. She rose, knees shaking, but her gaze never left Red Jack's. A single pure note slipped from her lips, soft as dawn breeze. The chaos did not cease, yet every soul felt that sound. Grace stood too, harmonizing, their twin voices spiraling above the gunpowder haze like 2 doves in a storm. Garrett watched the impossible unfold. Deputy rifles lowered, Jack's men blinking as though awakened from nightmare. Piano strings, some intact, began to vibrate sympathetically, humming in ghostly resonance with the sisters' lullaby. Even Marshall Carter, crouched behind a butchered table, dared lift his head. The song climbed, lyrical and raw, until it struck the high refrain, the same note that had shattered laughter earlier, but now it split terror instead. Red Jack's rifle sagged. His eyes, once chips of ice, shimmered. Tears, real, unstoppable, charted lines through the soot on his cheeks. The outlaw gulped, mouth working for words that would not form. At the bridge, his fingers opened. The rifle clattered to floorboards, already slick with spilled liquor. "Lucy never reached 12, he whispered, broken. "Pink fever took her. I promised I'd buy her a piano." The gunslinger's knees buckled. He slid against the bar like a marionette whose strings were cut, sobs shaking his shoulders. Ella and Grace kept singing, not triumphant, but gentle, as though soothing a child from nightmare. One by one, Jack's men dropped their weapons, shame outshining fear. Marshall Carter rose, crossed the distance, and snapped iron cuffs onto Red Jack's limp wrists. No one interfered. The only sound was the lullaby drifting to its final, fragile chord. When the girls finished, the saloon exhaled as a single body, a long, quaking breath that tasted of broken glass and newborn hope. Garrett closed his eyes, chest pounding. realizing they were still alive, and aware the night's story was not yet done. First light spilled through the bullet-chewed shutters, turning smoke into gold ribbons. Garrett Hayes knelt beside the twins, palms still trembling from adrenaline and awe. Around them, the rusty spur looked like a battlefield. Tables upended, mirrors shattered, floor glittering with glass and brass casings. Yet the air felt cleaner than any dawn Garrett could remember. Marshal Wade Carter hauled Red Jack Turner to his feet, iron clinking around the outlaw's wrists. Deputies gathered confiscated revolvers into a grain sack. Jack did not resist. He walked like a man emptied of everything but remorse. Eyes fixed on something only he could see. Perhaps a porch in Colorado where a little girl once sang. Carter paused at the doorway and addressed the room. Territories of Wyoming, Colorado, and Dakota each offer a reward for Turner. Dead or alive. Alive pays double. He tipped his hat toward Ella and Grace. Their voices made that possible. A murmur rippled, part approval, part wonder. Dusty Sam raised his tin cup in shaky salute. Buck Miller cleared his throat, cheeks red. "Well," he said, "reckon them girls earned more than applause." He fished a crumpled $5 bill from his vest and slapped it on the saloon bar. "For proper lodging." The gesture broke a levee. Coins, dollars, wedding rings, even a small gold nugget clanged onto the counter. Within minutes, the pile towered higher than the evening's ransom. Ella's eyes widened. "It's too much," she whispered. Grace gripped her hand, equally stunned. Garrett stood, shoulders sore but spirit light. "Not enough," he said softly. "You bought this town its soul back." He turned to Big Hank, the bartender still wiping blood from a splintered glass. "Know any place safe for children?" Hank nodded. "Miss Lila's boarding house has 2 empty rooms and a piano that's been lonely since her boy shipped off to war." "Consider the first year paid." Garrett scooped the tallest stack of bills and slid it toward Hank. "And breakfast on credit until they can't eat another bite." The chorus of gruff agreement felt like thunder returned as applause. Some men volunteered blankets. Others promised boots, lessons, a stray puppy. The twins' shock melted into shy smiles wider than the sunrise creeping through broken windows. Marshal Carter stepped back inside, reward poster folded in his pocket. "One more thing," he said, voice carrying authority and kindness in equal measure. "Hayes, a share of the bounty belongs to you." He extended a thick envelope. Garrett hesitated, then shook his head. "Use it to mend this place, Marshal. Tonight reminded us what a song can do. Might be the Spurs stage is worth more than my saddle." Carter's gaze softened as he tucked the envelope into Hank's apron. Deadwood could use more men who think like that. Outside, the street was waking. Merchants lifting shutters, miners tramping toward the hills. Deputies swung into formation, escorting Red Jack toward the jailhouse at the edge of town. As the outlaw disappeared, a hush hovered, as if the dust itself held its breath to see what came next. Garrett crouched, eye level with Ella and Grace. "I owe you more than I can ever say," he murmured. "Would you mind if I kept close a while? Make sure breakfast shows up hot and trouble stays cold?" Ella's smile glimmered. Grace giggled, first true laugh since Garrett had met them. "You can be our guardian," she declared, solemn as a judge. "Then guardian I'll be," Garrett answered, a warmth blooming where hopelessness had lived just hours earlier. He rose, nodded to Dusty Sam, to Buck, to every roughneck who had traded ridicule for reverence. A piano chord rang, Hank testing keys to gauge damage. Though several strings lay snapped, a rich note thrummed, eager for company. Ella approached the bench, fingertips brushing ivory. She looked to her sister. Grace slipped beside her. Together they pressed the first delicate harmony of the new day. Workers paused, hats in hand, as the melody drifted onto Main Street. Soft, unsteady, but unmistakably alive. It mingled with hoofbeats and morning bells, climbing the mineshaft road, settling on rooftops like the promise of rain after drought. Garrett leaned against the saloon's doorway, 13 useless cents still in his pocket, and listened. In a town scarred by lead and greed, 2 orphan voices forged a future brighter than any coin could buy. And for the first time in a long while, Garrett Hayes believed that redemption, like sunrise, came free of charge to anyone brave enough to face the dark until dawn.